Have you ever noticed your hand reaching for the phone before you even decided to move? As if some hidden part of you was still waiting for a message, a sign, a tiny confirmation that something, somewhere, had finally started changing. And now the checking happens automatically. Somewhere between two unfinished tasks, your fingers unlock the screen without permission, your chest tightens for half a second the way it always does, then loosens the way it always does when there is nothing there. No new message, no miracle, no evidence. And then you return to your day pretending it didn't matter that much. But it did. It still does. And maybe the strangest part isn't that you keep checking. Maybe the strangest part is that somewhere deep inside, in that quiet, embarrassed corner of yourself you rarely look at directly, you already know the truth. You already know the checking itself may be the very thing keeping it away. This morning, maybe you visualized. Maybe you sat in silence with music playing softly in the background. Maybe you felt the future for a few minutes and held the image carefully inside your mind. You did the work. You tried to align your state, your frequency, your energy. But then somewhere around 3 in the afternoon, you looked back at your life again. Really looked. Searching for proof. A sign. A coincidence. A new email. A shifted circumstance. Anything that could reassure your nervous system that movement was finally happening inside the quantum field of your life. And when nothing appeared, one voice inside you whispered, "Not yet." Then another voice, quieter and colder, whispered something even heavier. "Maybe never." So you closed the tab, returned to whatever you were doing, and carried that tiny unnamed disappointment through the rest of the day like invisible weight inside your chest. I need to say something to you now, and at first it may sound completely wrong. The checking is the leak. Every single time you turn around to verify whether reality has caught up to your desire yet, you send one message into the field again and again and again. It hasn't happened yet. It hasn't happened yet. It hasn't happened yet. And the field, faithful as always, reflects back exactly the state you keep broadcasting. For years you've been told that focus creates reality, that intention shapes the world, that what you feel, you attract. And none of that is entirely false. In fact, I recently spoke about this exact connection between focus and reality on this channel. But there is a missing piece almost nobody explains clearly enough. And the missing piece is so simple, it almost feels insulting once you finally see it. At a certain point, too much focus begins pushing the thing away. At a certain point, desire itself becomes interference. At a certain point, caring too much becomes the very force keeping the thing at a distance while you exhaust yourself trying harder and harder to pull it closer. You clicked on this video because something in the title disturbed you in a familiar way. The faster you ignore reality, the faster it changes. It sounds backwards, almost irresponsible, because all your life you were taught that maturity means facing reality directly, that ignoring is for dreamers, cowards, delusional people. So when you first heard those words, some part of you resisted instantly. But underneath the resistance, there was recognition. Because some deeper layer of you has suspected this for a very long time. You just never had language for it before. So stay with the discomfort a little longer. I'm not asking you to stop wanting what you want. I'm going to tell you something stranger than that. Most of what you call paying attention to reality is actually one of the most expensive forms of self-sabotage a human nervous system can perform. And once you truly see the mechanism, you cannot unsee it again. There's a Russian writer named Vadim Zeland who spent years describing something most people experience constantly without ever naming directly. He called it excess importance. And the moment you understand what he meant, huge parts of your life suddenly reorganize themselves in your mind. Not into comfort, into clarity. Excess importance is what happens when something matters so much to you that the emotional weight itself becomes the obstacle. This is not the same thing as caring. Caring is human. Caring is healthy. Excess importance begins the moment caring crosses a certain invisible threshold and transforms into pressure, into energetic tension, into a charge placed onto the outcome itself. And the moment that charge appears, everything around the situation starts subtly distorting, including your own access to the thing you want. You already know this feeling. You've lived it more times than you can count. You just never separated the two clearly enough to notice what was happening. Think about the relationship you wanted more than anything, the one you desperately hoped would work. Slowly you began monitoring every tiny shift in their tone, every delayed reply, every pause, every slight distance. You weren't paranoid. You were invested. But eventually the investment became surveillance. You stopped being inside the relationship and started managing it from outside. Measuring, interpreting, analyzing, trying to decode every silence. And somewhere along the way, the person on the other side began feeling something they couldn't fully explain. A heaviness in the atmosphere, a pressure in the air, something too dense to breathe inside comfortably. And almost imperceptibly, they began pulling away. Not always because they stopped loving you. Sometimes simply because the weight itself became unbearable. Think about that job interview. The one you needed so badly you believed it would change your entire life. You prepared for weeks. You rehearsed every answer. You imagined the office, the salary, the new version of yourself that would exist once you got it. But when the day finally came, your voice tightened. Your hands betrayed you. Your natural charm disappeared. And there you were, watching yourself perform a smaller, more anxious version of who you actually are, unable to understand why it was happening. The answer is painfully simple. You needed it too much. The need entered the room before you did. And the person sitting across from you, even if they couldn't explain it logically, could still feel the weight of that need in the atmosphere. An invisible pressure hanging in the air between you. And instinctively, they stepped back from it. Almost everyone has lived through this same pattern in another form. The night you couldn't sleep because you needed to sleep. You had something important the next morning. You knew you had to rest. But the harder you tried, the more awake you became. Every time you checked the clock, the math became more terrifying. 6 hours left. Then 5. Then 4. By 3 in the morning, you felt like a trapped animal inside your own body, begging it to give you the one thing the body never delivers on command. Sleep does not come to those who chase it. It comes to those who stop negotiating with it. And this is not coincidence. This is structure. There is something built into the architecture of human desire that causes intensity to turn against itself once it crosses a certain threshold. You can want something softly and watch it arrive naturally. But you can want that exact same thing desperately and watch it remain out of reach for years. The object never changed. The wanting did. Vadim Zeland called excess importance the most reliable saboteur of any goal a human being can pursue. And once you begin seeing the mechanism, you start seeing it everywhere. In careers, in relationships, in spiritual practice, especially in spiritual practice. Because spiritual people are often uniquely skilled at placing excess importance on outcomes while convincing themselves they've surrendered. You have meditated for results. You have manifested with a clenched jaw. You have visualized abundance using the exact same nervous system that visualizes disaster. You called it devotion, but it was something else entirely. And I'm not going to pretend I learned this from books alone. I learned it the same way most people learn anything real. Through failure. Through gripping something too tightly and watching it slip through my fingers over and over again for years without understanding why. Until eventually I became exhausted enough to loosen my grip almost by accident, and then watched, in complete confusion, the very thing I had been chasing quietly walk into my life on its own. There's an old phrase from fishing villages, the kind of saying passed down so many generations nobody remembers who first spoke it. The fish you want most is the fish that knows you're watching. I don't know if that's literally true about fish, but I know it's true about almost everything else in life. The thing you stare at with too much hunger somehow becomes aware of your stare, and then it adjusts. It moves. It hides itself in plain sight just beyond your reach for as long as your hunger remains the loudest thing in the room. What we are talking about here is not the law of attraction in the simplified way it gets sold online. It's not vibration. It's not frequency in the way most people use those words. What we're talking about is something much older. An observation ancient people already understood long before modern language wrapped itself around it. Zealand simply gave it new terminology. When you place too much emotional weight onto one point in your life, the entire field surrounding that point begins to deform. And that deformation is what you've been calling reality. You have not been failing. You have not been doing it wrong. You've simply been pressing too hard against a surface that only opens to a soft hand. And nobody told you softness was the technique because the people teaching you were pressing too hard too. They just had better background music while doing it. So before we go deeper, before we talk about mechanism, before I explain what Zealand believed happens inside the field when excess importance accumulates, I want you to sit quietly with the phrase itself for a moment. Excess importance. Not importance. Excess. The amount beyond what the structure can carry before it bends. The weight that pushes something beyond its natural design. The grip that transforms holding into crushing. And somewhere inside yourself, you probably already know exactly where this lives in your life right now. You don't need me to point at it. You felt it the moment I began describing it. A person, a goal, a fear, a dream, a longing. Somewhere you've been carrying more weight than the situation itself was ever built to hold. And you've been calling that weight love, or focus, or commitment, or manifestation. Meanwhile, the situation itself, faithful like a mirror, has been slowly bending under that weight in the only direction it can bend, away from you. Zealand describes something called balancing forces. The name sounds technical, but the thing it points toward is one of the most uncomfortable patterns you will ever notice in your own life once you begin paying attention to it. The core idea is simple. The field you exist inside, call it reality, the environment, consciousness, whatever language feels comfortable to you, contains its own form of homeostasis, a tendency toward balance. And when you place an enormous charge onto one single point, when one outcome begins to matter wildly more than everything else around it, the field registers that imbalance and activates forces designed to neutralize it. And almost always, those forces neutralize it through the path that hurts the most. Not because the universe is cruel, but because pain is often the only thing strong enough to finally make you release the charge. You've probably lived through this already. You called it bad luck. You called it the universe testing you. But what you were actually witnessing was a system behaving exactly the way systems behave when too much pressure builds in one location. It releases the pressure. And from inside the human experience, that release feels like sabotage. The career opportunity you needed more than oxygen disappears because of a tiny technicality. The relationship you tried to hold together with both hands collapses the moment your grip becomes visible. The financial breakthrough you've been forcing for years moves further away every time you push harder, and then strangely returns the moment you stop pushing. None of this is random. None of it means you are unworthy. It is simply the field doing what fields do. The moment one part of the system begins pulling all the energy in the room toward a single point, the system redistributes it. There's something I want to be careful about here, because this is usually the point where most teachers lose the thread completely. They take an observation like this and immediately turn it into something vague and cosmic. They tell you the universe is correcting you. They tell you your soul needed the lesson. And maybe sometimes that's true. Maybe. But very often, those explanations become a way of avoiding the simpler thing happening underneath everything. The more measurable thing. The more human thing. Your nervous system is part of the field. And when you place excess importance onto a goal, your nervous system begins reacting in a deeply biological way that any neuroscientist could explain in plain language. The moment your brain categorizes an outcome as essential to survival, even emotional survival, the amygdala activates. Cortisol rises. The sympathetic nervous system tilts toward fight or flight. Your peripheral vision narrows. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for subtle creativity, connection, intuition, relational intelligence, starts losing bandwidth. Neurologically, you become a person scanning for danger. And a person scanning for danger cannot become receptive. Receptivity requires a relaxed system. A system that feels safe enough to let something new arrive. So when you desperately need the job, your body walks into the interview, carrying the exact posture that repels opportunity. When you desperately need the relationship to survive, your body unconsciously emits signals that make the other person feel monitored, watched, surveilled. And when you visualize abundance while your jaw is tight and your chest is contracted, your body is not producing the chemistry of abundance at all. It's producing the chemistry of scarcity. The visualization itself matters far less than the state underneath it. And the state underneath it, in that moment, is painfully simple. I am not safe until this happens. Reality responds to state. Not affirmations, not vision boards. State. There's a physics experiment almost everyone in this space has heard about, usually explained badly. The double-slit experiment. I'm not going to drag you through the entire thing because the internet has already mutilated it enough. But there's one small part of it worth holding quietly for a moment. When particles are not being observed, they behave one way. They spread. They move like waves. Possibilities remain open. But the moment observation enters the picture, attention, measurement, scrutiny, something changes. The possibilities collapse into a single fixed position. Now I want to be careful here too. Physicists are still debating what this actually means, and anyone telling you the experiment has one final spiritual interpretation is usually trying to sell certainty where certainty doesn't exist. But even so, there's a metaphor hidden inside the science that becomes difficult to ignore once you've seen it. Observation changes the thing being observed. And inside the much messier, more emotional laboratory of human life, the same pattern seems to appear again and again in ways that feel almost literal. When you observe a desired outcome with desperate attention, hungry attention, surveillance-level attention, when you check, and check again, and check again, you slowly collapse the field of possibilities into the exact state your nervous system keeps broadcasting. It hasn't arrived yet. You keep witnessing its absence. You keep documenting the fact that it still isn't here. In the most literal sense possible, you keep observing a reality in which you do not have the thing. And the field, which has no emotional opinion about your worthiness, simply reflects back the reality you observe most consistently. This is not mysticism. This is what your own attention has been doing quietly in the background of your life every single day. A few years ago, researchers at the University of California studied insight problems, the kinds of problems that refuse to yield under force. And the results were almost embarrassing. The people who tried the hardest solved the problems least often. The people who stepped away, who took breaks, who let attention soften and drift, who stopped grinding mentally, those were the people who arrived at the breakthrough. Because the brain does not deliver its best insights under pressure. It delivers them in the soft seconds after pressure releases. In the shower, on a quiet walk, in that strange moment between sleeping and waking when the grip on the problem finally loosens. Researchers call this defocused attention, and study after study keeps reproducing the same pattern across creativity, athletic performance, therapy, problem solving. The pattern holds. Excess effort narrows the channel through which the thing you want is trying to arrive. And narrowing the channel does not speed the process up. It chokes the flow. So now look at what's happening. On one side, you have Vadim Zeland describing balancing forces through the language of metaphysics. On another side, neuroscience describing the cortisol-loaded nervous system as a closed receiver. On another side, quantum physics wrestling with what observation does to possibility. And on yet another side, creativity researchers showing that insight refuses to appear under direct force. For completely different vocabularies. One observation. The thing you grip with the greatest intensity is often the thing that recedes from you most reliably. And I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty about every closed door in your life. I'm telling you this because eventually, if you stay with this long enough, you stop taking the pattern personally. You stop reading every delay as proof you are unworthy. Every silence as cosmic rejection. Every setback as evidence that life has chosen someone else over you. Instead, you begin seeing a mechanism, a system, a convergence of biology, psychology, and perception all pointing toward the same uncomfortable truth. You were never unlucky. You were heavy. And the field, which carries everything inside it, was doing what every field does when too much weight accumulates in one place. It redistributes the weight, often through the path that hurts enough to finally make you put it down. Now I want to use a word that may make part of you resist instantly, and I need you to stay with that resistance instead of running from it. The word is ignore. Your entire life, you were taught that ignoring reality is what immature people do. Ignoring is what cowards do. Ignoring is what delusional people do when they refuse to face facts. So naturally the word carries shame around it. And honestly, sometimes it deserves to. Because denial disguised as spirituality is still denial. But there is another kind of ignoring entirely. A technical kind. A disciplined kind. A kind that actually requires more awareness than the obsessive attention you've been practicing for years. And this is the kind I want you to consider. To ignore reality in the way I'm describing does not mean pretending your bank account looks different. It does not mean lying to yourself about the relationship that ended, the pain in your body, or the silence on the other side of the phone. You see all of it, clearly, honestly, but you refuse to grant it the authority of being the final word. Because here is the piece almost nobody explains clearly enough. The reality sitting in front of your eyes right now is not a live broadcast. It is a delayed echo. A photograph that finished developing today from film that was exposed weeks, months, maybe years ago. The state you carried in your nervous system back then, that is what you are seeing now. The dominant emotional atmosphere you lived inside last season, that is what is appearing physically today. Sit with that for a moment. The bank balance you keep checking today may simply be the echo of who you were 6 months ago. The body you see in the mirror may be the echo of years of stress, food, exhaustion, survival mode. The relationships around you may be the echo of emotional patterns repeated for a decade. None of it is current information. All of it is old news finally arriving at your door. But every day, you treat this old news as if it were a prophecy. You read the echo like a forecast. You let yesterday's reality dictate tomorrow's possibilities. You build your inner state around what has already been completed and then wonder why nothing changes. And when you finally see this clearly, there's something almost tragic and funny about it at the same time. You've been arguing with the past while believing you were arguing with the present. You've been trying to negotiate with a package that was already delivered. The shift I'm pointing toward is small, but architectural. You don't deny the package. You don't destroy it. You receive it. You acknowledge what's inside it. But you stop allowing it to tell you what tomorrow must become. Because tomorrow's reality is being assembled right now by the state you repeatedly sustain today. That is what strategic ignoring actually means. It means refusing to let present evidence dominate your inner world with the authority you've been giving it. I'm not going to overreach with the physics here. Too many people have taken quantum mechanics, stripped it of nuance, and turned it into a slogan for self-help. I won't do that. But there is something undeniably honest hidden inside the observation itself. The way you look at reality matters. Not only whether you look, but the quality of the gaze you bring to it. A grasping gaze and a relaxed gaze do not produce the same effect, not in laboratories, and not in human lives. When you stare at your reality through the lens of desperation, constantly checking, verifying, measuring, scoring whether anything has changed, you strengthen the exact version of reality already sitting in front of you. You add more weight to what is already heavy. The structure remains fixed because your nervous system keeps insisting that it must remain fixed. But when you look softly, when you can acknowledge what exists without emotionally kneeling before it, when you can witness circumstances without treating them as the final chapter, something begins to loosen. Not because you fooled yourself, not because you escaped reality, because you finally stopped feeding an expired version of your life with the most valuable resource you possess, which is your attention. There's an ancient Buddhist idea that has survived for thousands of years, and almost everyone misunderstands it. Non-attachment. People hear those words and immediately assume they mean indifference. They think it means not caring. But that was never the point. Non-attachment means caring deeply without gripping desperately. It means loving an outcome without making your peace dependent on whether it arrives. It means stepping fully into life without collapsing every time life refuses to follow the exact script you imagined. That's the territory we're entering here. Not numbness. Not emotional shutdown. Not pretending you no longer want what you want. Something much more difficult. Wanting without crushing. You can desire love without monitoring every silence. You can desire wealth without panicking every time you open your bank account. You can desire healing without obsessing over every sensation in your body. The desire itself is not the enemy. The grip is. And what you are slowly learning to release is not the desire, but the desperate clutch around it. Because when you strategically ignore reality, what you're really doing is refusing to keep casting votes with your nervous system for a version of life that has already finished playing out. You stop emotionally renewing the old identity. You stop replaying the rerun as if it were live television. I know this can sound dangerous when someone is in pain. It can sound like spiritual bypassing, like another version of just stop caring and everything will magically appear. But that's not what this is. This is far more precise than that. The version of you who already has the thing does not constantly check for proof of it. That is the clue most people miss. The person who already feels loved does not compulsively search for evidence that love exists. The person who already lives in abundance does not refresh the bank app every 20 minutes. The person who already feels healthy does not catastrophize every ache in their body. Why? Because checking is what people do when uncertainty is still dominating the nervous system. And uncertainty itself becomes part of the signal being broadcast. You become internally before reality visibly catches up, sometimes long before. Days, weeks, months. And the gap between those two realities, the inner state and the external evidence, is where almost everyone breaks. They hold the new state for 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, and then they look around and see the old circumstances still standing there unchanged. The silence is still there. The numbers are still the same. The mirror still reflects the old image. And they conclude it isn't working. So they collapse back into the previous state. And the moment they collapse, the cycle begins again from the beginning. Most people are not failing because they can't visualize. They are failing because they cannot maintain the new internal state while standing in the middle of contradictory evidence. They keep auditing reality, and every audit pulls them backward. Every emotional inspection costs another week of momentum. To ignore reality means to stop auditing before the system has had time to update. It means living for a while through a kind of structural faith, not blind belief, not fantasy, something steadier. A decision that what you see today will not dictate who you become tomorrow. A refusal to let the echo of the past vote on the construction of the future. And this is the hardest part of the entire process. Harder than affirmations. Harder than visualization. The hardest part is surviving the space between the internal shift and the visible proof. The stretch of time where everything around you still resembles the old life, yet you continue choosing to embody the new version of yourself anyway. Without confirmation, without applause, without anyone reassuring you that you're sane. That's where the real work lies. And that's exactly where most people give up, because nobody taught them that the delay is normal. Nobody told them the echo arrives late. So they interpret the absence of immediate change as proof that nothing is happening. But something is happening. It's simply happening upstream from where they keep looking. So what does living this way actually feel like on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon? Not philosophically, not conceptually, practically. At first, it feels like silence. A silence you almost distrust. Because you've spent so many years with the engine of wanting running constantly in the background of your mind that when the engine finally quiets down, your first instinct is to start it back up again. Wait, am I still committed? Am I still focused enough? Am I still making this happen? But the question itself is the engine restarting. The question is the old machinery revving itself back to life. And the practice becomes learning to let the silence remain silence without immediately filling it with another performance of devotion. It starts looking like this. You notice the impulse to check, the familiar pull toward the phone, the bank app, the mirror, the inbox, whatever your personal ritual of reassurance has become. And instead of immediately obeying the impulse, you stay still for a moment. You let the urge rise and pass through your body without automatically turning it into action. You don't shame yourself for feeling it. You don't congratulate yourself for resisting it. You simply notice it and remain. And slowly, over time, the impulse loses its hands on the steering wheel of your day. It begins to feel like walking past evidence you once depended on. You used to need signs, synchronicities, tiny confirmations that the universe had heard you. You collected these moments like receipts proving your future was still alive. But the state we're talking about no longer survives on receipts. Not because you became cold or detached, but because your certainty moved somewhere deeper, somewhere beyond external proof. The internal posture becomes something quieter. Something like, it has already happened inside me. The world simply hasn't caught up yet. And my job is not to force the world to hurry. My job is to continue being the version of myself for whom this reality is already true. That is the instruction. That is the practice. Become the person to whom it has already happened and allow the evidence to arrive in its own timing. Now I want to explain why this feels so difficult for almost everyone. Because if I simply tell you to do this without understanding the structure beneath it, you'll fail within 48 hours and assume the failure belongs to you. But it doesn't. The difficulty is structural. Your brain, in the most literal evolutionary sense, was designed to scan for danger and resources. Human cognition naturally drifts toward unfinished problems, uncertainty, potential threats. This is not a personality flaw. This is survival biology. Your ancestors who stopped scanning carelessly did not survive long enough to pass on their genes. You inherited the scanners. And in modern life, where there are no predators hiding in the grass, The scanning mechanism redirected itself toward your bank account, your relationships, your messages, your symptoms, your future. So when I tell you to stop checking, I'm not asking you to override a simple habit. I'm asking you to override a piece of neural architecture older than language itself. That is not a small request, which is why willpower alone almost never works. The shift happens through another doorway entirely, through the slow installation of a new internal certainty strong enough to make scanning feel unnecessary. And then there's the cultural layer underneath all of this, the part almost nobody names directly. Somewhere along the way, you were taught to confuse caring with worrying. You were taught to confuse commitment with vigilance. Look at how many parents express love through anxiety. Look at how romantic devotion is portrayed in stories, constant obsession, constant monitoring, constant emotional intensity. Look at how professionals prove seriousness through visible stress and exhaustion. At a cultural level, we've fused caring and suffering together so deeply that most people no longer know the difference between love and nervous attachment. So when someone tells you to care without clutching, your nervous system hears care less. Because in the emotional language you were raised inside, gripping became the proof that something mattered. There is no vocabulary in your body yet for deep care without tension. You have to build that language from the beginning. And that takes time. Which is why the people who learn this most naturally are often the ones who were broken open by life itself. They wanted something for so long, with such force, with such relentless internal gripping, that eventually something inside them collapsed beneath the weight. They became too exhausted to continue carrying the same level of wanting. And in that collapse, almost by accident, they discovered the lightness on the other side of release. And from that lightness, the thing they had spent years chasing quietly entered through the very doorway they had finally stopped guarding. But you do not need to wait for breakdown in order to learn this. That's part of why conversations like this exist. So you can choose to put the weight down before the weight breaks something inside you. But you have to know beforehand that it will feel disloyal at first. It will feel as though you are abandoning the dream, betraying your commitment, weakening your devotion. But you are not abandoning anything. You are learning a different form of loyalty. The loyalty of someone who trusts the thing enough to stop standing guard over it every second of the day. The loyalty of someone who understands that obsessive vigilance is not the highest form of love. In fact, obsessive vigilance is often a coded form of distrust. I have to keep watching this because I don't believe it's safe unless I control it. Imagine treating another human being that way, following them constantly, checking their phone every 15 minutes, monitoring every shift in tone. We would call that anxiety at best, controlling behavior at worst. And yet this is exactly how most people treat the futures they claim to love. They surveil their own dreams. They interrogate them. They follow them around emotionally every hour of the day. And then they wonder why their dreams begin feeling suffocated in their presence. Once again, ancient traditions understood this long before modern language existed for it. Buddhism spoke of non-attachment. The Stoics arrived there through another path. Marcus Aurelius wrote that external things can never become the foundation of peace because they do not belong to you, and whatever does not belong to you can eventually disappear. Taoism reached the same truth through the idea of effortless action, not passivity, not laziness, action without inner resistance, action without fighting the current internally every step of the way. These traditions did not develop these ideas because they lacked philosophy to entertain themselves. They developed them because human beings have been suffocating their own dreams through excessive gripping for as long as human beings have had dreams. This is one of the oldest observations our species has ever made about itself. And every generation has to rediscover it because the noise of modern life keeps drowning it out. Push harder. Want more? Focus tighter. Optimize further. Grip tighter. If you've made it this far into this conversation, something inside you is already beginning the rediscovery. Your nervous system is remembering something it was built to forget under stress. And that matters more than you realize. I want to say something gently now because I know how painful this realization can become once it starts landing fully inside your chest. Some of you are listening right now with a heaviness in your throat because you're recognizing, maybe for the first time clearly, how much of your life has been spent gripping. How many years of low-grade anxiety were disguised as ambition? How many relationships became strained beneath the weight of how desperately you needed them to survive? And that recognition can hurt deeply. It can feel like grieving for the version of yourself who was trying so hard with the wrong tools. But be careful with that grief too. Don't turn the regret into another object of gripping. Don't transform, "I should have understood this sooner," into the next excess importance. Because the grip is sneaky. If you stop watching carefully, it simply moves from one object to another. The work is not to grip the lesson itself. The work is to absorb it slowly, softly, without crushing even the healing process. You are not late. You are exactly where you are. And the version of you who spent years gripping so tightly was not foolish. That version of you was trying to protect something fragile with the only tools they knew how to use. Honor that version. Thank that version. And then gently take the steering wheel back. There was a man I knew. I'll call him David. Not his real name. Just enough to protect his privacy. But the story itself is true, and what happened to him is one of the clearest examples I've ever witnessed of this entire mechanism unfolding in real time. David was 43 when his marriage of 12 years ended. Not dramatically, quietly, the way many long marriages end. Not with one catastrophic explosion, but through years of slow erosion that neither person fully notices until one day the ground beneath them is already gone. From the outside, David looked fine. He had a job, an apartment, friends, a daughter he saw every weekend. He was sleeping, eating, functioning. In the language people use to comfort themselves, he was handling it well. About 6 months later, he decided he was ready to date again. And this is where things became interesting. Because David was not a casual man. He was methodical, analytical, the kind of person who approached dating the same way he approached his career. With systems, research, optimization. He read books, listened to podcasts, improved his profile, took professional photos, went to therapy, practiced affirmations. Every morning, he visualized the exact relationship he wanted in cinematic detail. And nothing happened. Or worse, the wrong things kept happening. He met women who looked perfect on paper but disappeared after 2 dates. He met women who genuinely liked him, yet somehow he became emotionally cold toward them without understanding why. He met women whose timing was wrong. Women whose timing was right, but whose values didn't align. Year after year, he kept trying in the technical sense, but the ground beneath him kept sliding sideways. 2 years passed, then 3, then 4. By the 4th year, David had become a man with a graduate-level education in relationship psychology and absolutely no relationship. He could explain attachment styles. He could map his emotional patterns. He could deliver a 15-minute monologue about healing and self-awareness. And he was still alone. But now the loneliness had hardened into something denser. A quiet internal conclusion forming in the back of his chest that maybe love simply wasn't going to happen for him anymore. Maybe he had already used up whatever portion of intimacy life had assigned him. The shift, when it finally arrived, did not come from a new technique. It came from exhaustion. A very specific kind of exhaustion. One Saturday morning, he woke up and realized something that stunned him with its simplicity. For 4 years, he had not actually been living. He had been performing the role of a man preparing to be loved. And he was tired. Not tired of love. Tired of the performance. So he stopped. Not dramatically. He didn't delete every app in some emotional ceremony. He simply stopped optimizing. He stopped reading relationship books. Stopped running endless internal diagnostics about whether he was emotionally available enough. Stopped doing exercises. Stopped asking himself every morning if today would finally be the day. He didn't abandon love. He abandoned the constant auditing of its arrival. And for the next few months, something strange happened. He drifted back toward the parts of life he had quietly abandoned while all his attention had been consumed by searching. He started painting again, badly, the way he used to in his 20s before life became serious. He took long drives with his daughter without trying to turn every moment into productivity or healing. He began reading novels again, real novels, not self-help books disguised as transformation. He let his apartment stay slightly messy. He let weekends remain unplanned. And during those months, something inside him settled into a kind of silence he could never have manufactured intentionally. The engine that had been running in the background of his mind for 4 straight years. Am I ready? When will it happen? What am I doing wrong? Engine finally went quiet. Not because he conquered it, because he stopped feeding it. The fuel had always been attention, and he redirected the attention elsewhere. So the engine slowly starved. Then one Tuesday night, he met her at a gathering he almost didn't attend. A friend's birthday. Low stakes. Ordinary. He went because he wanted to see his friend, not because he was scanning the room for possibility. He wasn't dressed strategically. He wasn't rehearsing lines. For the first time in years, he was simply a man having a conversation instead of a man trying to engineer an outcome. And according to him, she was not even the kind of woman he thought he had been visualizing all those years. She was different. Better in a way he couldn't have described beforehand, because the woman he had spent years imagining was partially constructed from fear, compensation, loneliness, and unconscious attempts to repair himself. The real connection standing in front of him did not match the fantasy, because reality almost never enters through the door the mind predicts. They talked for 2 hours. He drove home afterward and didn't even text her that night. Not strategically. He genuinely forgot. His mind was occupied with other things. His daughter's school play that weekend. The unfinished painting sitting in his apartment. Life. He texted her casually the next afternoon. She replied the following day. They met for coffee a week later. Nothing about it carried the desperate high-pressure atmosphere his previous attempts had carried. Nothing felt like a mission. They built the relationship slowly, lightly, almost accidentally, like two people who were not trying to force destiny into existence. They've now been together for nearly 3 years. And I'm telling you this story not because it's rare. It isn't. Some version of this has happened to almost everyone you know who eventually found the thing they spent years chasing. The career opportunity that appeared right after someone stopped applying with panic in their chest. The financial breakthrough that arrived during the year someone finally stopped obsessively tracking every number. The friendship that healed the moment one person stopped trying to emotionally force the repair. These stories are everywhere, but people misread them as luck. I finally got lucky, as though the loosening that immediately preceded the breakthrough had nothing to do with it. It had everything to do with it. Look closely at what happened to David. The excess importance he placed on partnership had created a state of constant internal vigilance. That vigilance leaked into every interaction, every conversation, every date. His nervous system was quietly broadcasting pressure before he even spoke. And pressure closes channels. Pressure collapses openness. The balancing forces responded exactly the way systems always respond when too much weight accumulates around a single outcome. They neutralized the pressure by withholding the very thing he was overcharging. The neuroscience matched the pattern too. A cortisol-loaded nervous system unconsciously communicates unsafety. And unsafety does not invite intimacy. The reality he kept observing. I am alone. I am still alone. Why am I still alone? Kept recreating itself every time he emotionally checked the evidence. And then one day he stopped observing the absence entirely. Not by pretending love was there. Not by forcing positivity. He simply stopped organizing his attention around the question itself. His attention moved toward painting, toward his daughter, toward books sitting unread on shelves. The grip loosened. The vigilance dissolved. His nervous system finally exhaled. And the field, patient the entire time, delivered something that may have been trying to enter his life for years, but couldn't move through the wall created by his constant surveillance of its absence. When you step back and look at all of this together, you realize these are not separate ideas. They are one structure described through different languages. Excess importance overloads the system. Balancing forces respond by redistributing the pressure. The nervous system under pressure broadcasts unsafety and closes receptivity. The reality you keep observing repeats itself because your observation keeps feeding it. The loop stays locked because the attention stays locked. And beneath all of it is one unbearable truth that almost nobody wants to hear. The thing you want most may have been waiting all along for you to stop guarding the door it was trying to walk through. David did not manifest his partner in the simplistic way people online use the word. He did something far more difficult and far more real. He stopped obstructing. And the woman who may have existed somewhere inside his life's radius for years, passing invisibly at the edge of his awareness, finally became visible the moment he stopped searching for her with desperate eyes. This is the engine. This entire thing. Wanting itself is not the problem. Wanting is human. Wanting is natural. The grip is what breaks the mechanism. The endless auditing delays the arrival. The constant surveillance of your own dream makes it retreat the same way every living thing retreats when watched too intensely. And when this shift finally begins happening inside you, it won't arrive dramatically. That's important to understand. Nobody around you will notice it at first. Your coworkers won't comment on your new energy. Your friends won't suddenly recognize your transformation. The changes begin internally, in moments so small that if you're waiting for fireworks, you'll completely miss them. It looks like waking up in the morning and feeling the familiar pull to immediately check something. Your inbox, your phone, your bank balance, the scale, whatever your personal ritual of reassurance has become. And instead of instantly obeying the impulse, you pause for 3 seconds. Not as a performance, not to congratulate yourself, just enough space to notice the pull before acting on it. Maybe you still check afterward. Maybe you don't. That's not even the important part. The important part is that a millimeter of space now exists between the impulse and the action. And that millimeter, repeated daily, becomes the entire technology of transformation. It looks like driving to work and catching yourself rehearsing future conversations in your head, future victories, future explanations, future fears. And instead of endlessly rehearsing, you gently return your attention to the road, the music, the passing trees. No drama, no shame. You simply return. It looks like realizing halfway through the afternoon that you've spent 40 minutes mentally checking whether your dream is working yet. And the noticing itself becomes the victory, because the old version of you would never have noticed. The old version would have stayed trapped in projection for the rest of the day without ever becoming conscious of it. It looks like lying awake at night, feeling the mind reach again toward worry, toward the future that still hasn't arrived, toward the body that hasn't changed, toward the relationship that hasn't healed. And instead of letting the mind squeeze those thoughts for another 40 minutes, you notice the reaching and you sleep. Not because you solved anything, because for one moment you stopped believing that gripping was necessary in order for life to continue moving. Even your inner voice begins changing slowly. When is it finally going to happen? Becomes something is already moving. What am I doing wrong? Becomes what does this day actually need from me? There's still no evidence. Becomes the evidence I'm staring at is old news. None of this is performance. None of it is affirmation theater. It's a slow recalibration of the emotional tone you use with yourself every day. And the hardest part, I need to be honest with you about this, is the in-between period. The days when you've practiced this for a week or two and the outer reality still looks exactly the same. The bank account hasn't changed. The relationship hasn't changed. The phone is still silent. And the temptation during those moments becomes enormous. The temptation to conclude none of this is working. To grab the steering wheel again. To resume auditing reality every hour. But you have to understand this deeply. Delay is normal. What you see today is often the echo of what you sustained emotionally months ago. The new state has not yet had time to fully develop into visible form. Photographs require time to develop. Seeds do not become trees the same afternoon they are planted. There is no dimension of human life where deep processes unfold instantly. Your inner world is no exception. So you continue. You return again and again to that tiny millimeter of space between impulse and reaction, between checking and breathing, between panic and presence. And over enough days, that millimeter becomes an entirely new internal landscape that did not exist before. There's another layer to this that most people never notice until the pattern has repeated enough times to finally break their heart open. The moment you stop gripping so tightly, life often begins moving again in ways that feel almost eerie. Not instantly, not magically, but subtly at first, quietly, like frozen water beginning to crack beneath the surface long before anyone can hear the sound. And this is where people become confused, because the mind expects transformation to arrive dramatically. Trumpets, signs, fireworks in the sky. But real internal shifts almost never announce themselves that way. They arrive through tiny adjustments in your relationship with attention, tiny interruptions in the old compulsive loop. You wake up one morning and realize you didn't immediately check your phone. Not because you forced discipline onto yourself. You simply forgot. For a few minutes. And those few minutes feel strangely spacious. You drive to work and suddenly notice the trees outside your window instead of rehearsing future disasters for the entire commute. You catch yourself halfway through an old spiral, and, for the first time, you don't follow it all the way down. You return, quietly, naturally, without violence against yourself. And that return matters more than you realize. Because most people think transformation is about becoming a completely different person overnight. It isn't. It's about creating enough space between the impulse and the reaction that consciousness can finally enter the room before the old program takes over again. A single millimeter of awareness repeated daily becomes an entirely different life over time. And what's strange is that once this process begins, external reality often starts responding before you even fully trust what's happening internally. Opportunities appear without the same level of force. Conversations feel lighter. People respond differently to you without understanding why. The atmosphere around your life changes first, before the visible structure changes afterward. Because the nervous system you carry into the world is constantly communicating something beneath language. Long before words arrive, people feel whether you are gripping or allowing, whether you are trying to extract something from the moment or actually present inside it. And presence has a completely different texture than desperation. Presence invites. Desperation contracts. This is why some people can walk into a room saying almost nothing and still shift the emotional atmosphere around them. Their system is no longer broadcasting need at full volume. There's space inside them. Openness. Breathing room. And other nervous systems unconsciously relax around that. They trust it. Not intellectually. Biologically. The irony is that the version of you who finally receives the thing you wanted is often the version of you who no longer needs it in the same desperate way. Not because desire disappeared, but because your identity stopped depending on the outcome for survival. That shift changes everything. And this is also why forcing high vibration all day long becomes exhausting. Because underneath the performance, the nervous system often still feels terrified, still scanning, still checking, still secretly asking reality every few minutes. Is it here yet? Is it here yet? Is it here yet? That question alone keeps the old structure alive, the old self alive, the old timeline alive. But when the question begins fading, something else emerges in its place. A quieter orientation toward life. Less chasing, more participation, less monitoring, more inhabiting. You stop treating your future like a hostage that must be watched constantly to prevent escape. You start treating life more like a current you can move with instead of a machine you must control every second. And slowly, almost invisibly, the body begins relearning safety. Not because every circumstance changed immediately, but because your relationship with uncertainty changed. That's the deeper shift hidden underneath all of this. The goal was never just the relationship, the money, the healing, the success. The deeper movement was always about becoming someone whose nervous system no longer collapses in the presence of uncertainty. Someone who can remain internally steady while reality rearranges itself at its own pace. And once you taste even a small amount of that steadiness, you begin understanding why so many ancient traditions placed inner state above outer circumstance. Because outer circumstances are unstable by nature. They move, they leave, they collapse, they reform. But the ability to remain open without gripping, that changes the entire texture of being alive. And yes, there will still be days when you fall back into the old pattern. Days when you check too much, worry too much, grip too hard. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you are human. The old conditioning was built over years, sometimes decades. It will not dissolve in one perfect week of awareness. But now something is different. Now you notice the gripping while it's happening. And that noticing itself is evidence that consciousness is no longer fully asleep inside the pattern. The old version of you would have lived inside the anxiety for hours without ever seeing it clearly. Now there is awareness, space, choice, even if only for a moment. And moments are enough, because lives are built from moments repeated consistently over time. So if you take anything from this conversation, let it be this. Stop staring at your life so hard. Stop interrogating reality every hour for proof that change is happening. Stop treating every delay like a verdict against your worth. Your future does not arrive faster because you panic at it harder. In many cases, it arrives the moment the panic finally loosens its hands. And maybe the strangest part of all is this. The thing you've been chasing may not actually be running from you. It may simply be waiting for you to stop standing in the doorway with all your fear, all your checking, all your pressure, blocking the entrance with the weight of your own attention. There's a question hiding underneath all of this that almost nobody wants to face directly, because the moment you face it honestly, you realize how much of your life has been organized around fear without ever calling it fear. The question is this: what are you actually afraid would happen if you stopped gripping so hard? Sit with that carefully, because most people immediately say the same thing. If I stop focusing on it, it will never happen. If I stop checking, I'll lose momentum. If I stop worrying, I'll become passive. But underneath those answers, there's usually something far more vulnerable hiding in the dark. If I let go, maybe life will forget me. And that fear changes the entire emotional atmosphere of a human being. Because now your desire is no longer just desire. It becomes survival. The relationship becomes proof you are lovable. The money becomes proof you are safe. The success becomes proof your existence mattered. And once an outcome becomes responsible for carrying your identity, your nervous system will cling to it with terrifying intensity. Not because you are weak, because biologically, emotionally, psychologically, the system now believes losing that outcome would feel like death. This is why people become exhausted, not from wanting too much, but from turning every desire into a referendum on their worth as a human being. Every unanswered message becomes rejection. Every delay becomes humiliation. Every obstacle becomes evidence that life itself is withholding love from them personally. But reality was never attacking you that way. You were simply carrying too much meaning in too small a container. And eventually the container starts cracking beneath the weight. There's an old metaphor about quicksand that applies perfectly here. Most people assume quicksand kills because it pulls too hard. But that isn't actually true. What traps people in quicksand is panic. The frantic struggling. The violent movements meant to escape. The harder the body fights, the deeper it sinks. Survival experts teach something completely counterintuitive. Stop thrashing. Spread your weight. Move slowly. Allow the surface tension of the sand to support you instead of fighting against it. And emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, this is exactly how most people live their lives. They are trapped in emotional quicksand while responding with panic disguised as effort. More checking, more forcing, more obsession, more control, more internal noise. And every movement they call trying harder only sinks them deeper into the very state they're attempting to escape. The irony is brutal. The mechanism that feels like safety is often the thing suffocating them. Because gripping creates the temporary illusion of control. It feels active, responsible, vigilant. But under the surface, the gripping is communicating one thing over and over again to the nervous system. We are not safe yet. And a nervous system that never feels safe cannot fully open to life. It cannot receive clearly. It cannot relax into timing. It cannot recognize opportunities that don't match its panic-scripted expectations. Everything becomes filtered through urgency, through hypervigilance, through contraction, which means the very intelligence that might guide you toward what you want becomes drowned beneath static. This is why people sometimes miss the exact thing they've been praying for. Not because life refused to send it, because it arrived in a form their panic could not recognize. The relationship came quietly while they were busy searching for fireworks. The opportunity appeared through a side door while they were obsessively staring at the main entrance. The healing began subtly while they were monitoring symptoms so intensely they couldn't feel the body changing underneath the fear. When your attention becomes too narrow, reality itself appears narrow. You stop seeing what doesn't fit the emotional shape of your expectation. That's another hidden cost of excess importance nobody talks about enough. It collapses perception. It shrinks possibility down to one rigid imagined pathway. It has to happen this way. It has to happen by this date. This person has to be the one. And meanwhile, life, which is infinitely more creative than the frightened human mind, keeps trying to approach you from directions your fixation refuses to look toward. There's a reason ancient wisdom traditions kept returning to openness over control. Not because they were passive, because openness allows perception to remain alive. A closed fist cannot receive anything new. And most people move through life emotionally clenched, wondering why nothing can enter their hands. If you pay attention closely, you'll notice something almost heartbreaking about the people who eventually find peace. They rarely find it through finally controlling every outcome. They find it through exhaustion with control itself. Through realizing the nervous system cannot survive permanent contraction forever. Something inside eventually surrenders. not in defeat, in relief. And in that relief, life begins flowing again through channels that panic had sealed shut for years. This is why so many spiritual teachings sound frustratingly simple. Let go, release attachment, trust the process. The words themselves are simple, but the lived reality underneath them is profound because what you are actually being asked to release is not the dream. You are being asked to release the fear that your existence depends on the dream arriving exactly the way you imagined. That is a much deeper surrender, and it cannot be faked. Your nervous system always knows whether you are truly open or secretly bargaining with reality behind spiritual language. I'll surrender as long as the thing arrives afterward. But real release contains no contract hidden inside it. It says something quieter. Even before the outcome changes, I refuse to spend the rest of my life imprisoned by the fear surrounding it. That decision alone changes the emotional architecture of a person. And strangely, once the architecture changes, reality often follows much faster than expected. Not because you manipulated the universe correctly, because you finally stopped choking the flow with constant emotional interference. There's another detail here people overlook constantly. The moment you stop gripping reality so aggressively, you also stop exhausting yourself at war with time. Most suffering is not created only by desire. It's created by the belief that the desire should have happened already. By this age, I should be farther ahead. By now, the relationship should be healed. By now, I should have become someone else. And so people are not only carrying the original desire, they are carrying shame about the timeline itself, panic about the delay, humiliation about not arriving quickly enough. But timelines are human constructions layered onto processes that are often organic, nonlinear, unpredictable. Seeds germinate underground long before visible growth appears. Entire ecosystems reorganize invisibly before the first surface-level change becomes obvious. Your life is no different. Some changes are occurring in places you cannot monitor directly. Some shifts are happening beneath perception itself. And the more obsessively you dig up the soil to check whether the roots are growing, the more you interrupt the growth you're desperate to witness. So eventually, this becomes less about manifestation and more about maturity. Emotional maturity, nervous system maturity, the ability to remain open without constant reassurance. The ability to continue participating in life without demanding immediate proof that everything is working. That kind of steadiness changes a human being from the inside outward. And once you've tasted even a small amount of it, the old frantic way of living begins feeling almost unbearable by comparison. You start realizing how much energy was leaking through endless monitoring, endless rehearsing, endless emotional surveillance of your own future. And with that realization comes grief sometimes. Grief for all the years spent standing guard at doors that may have opened on their own if you had simply trusted enough to step back. The grip will return. That part is inevitable. Not because you failed to understand any of this, but because the patterns you've been living inside were rehearsed for years, sometimes decades. The nervous system memorized them long before you ever had language for them. And one conversation, no matter how deep it lands, does not instantly erase muscle memory. But listen carefully to this, because this part matters more than almost anything else we've talked about. The moment you notice yourself gripping again, the moment you catch yourself checking, scanning, performing devotion through worry, that moment is not evidence that nothing changed. It's evidence that something already has. The old version of you would have disappeared completely into the pattern without seeing it at all. Now there is awareness inside the loop. Now there is space. Even if the space is tiny. Even if it only lasts 3 seconds before the old momentum pulls you back in. 3 seconds is enough to begin rewriting an entire life if repeated often enough. You're going to spend the next year, maybe the next decade, learning a very strange skill that almost nobody teaches directly. How to want something without strangling it. How to love something without surveilling it. How to care deeply without converting the caring into a low, constant hum of panic in the background of your nervous system. And you'll improve at this gradually. There will be weeks where it feels almost effortless, where you move through your days with an openness that surprises you. And then there will be days where you forget everything, where the old engine roars back online, and suddenly you're refreshing the phone again, replaying the future again, searching for signs again. Both states are part of the process. Neither one disqualifies you. What matters is the returning. Always the returning. Because reality shifts more quickly around the person who stopped staring at it every 5 minutes demanding proof. Whatever you've been waiting for may already be moving toward you from directions you cannot yet see. The delay does not automatically mean denial. And it certainly does not mean the universe has singled you out for punishment. More often than not, the thing hasn't arrived because you've been standing directly in the doorway searching for it. Your attention, your fear, your constant monitoring became the blockage itself. Imagine standing at a doorway, so intensely focused on whether someone is coming through that your body accidentally blocks the entrance completely. That's what most people are doing psychologically. They're watching the door instead of leaving space for arrival. So step to the side a little. Not forever. Not dramatically. Just enough to let life breathe again. Let the door remain a door instead of turning it into a courtroom where your worth gets judged every hour. Trust the architecture of your own existence a little more than you currently do. And while things unfold, return to the parts of life you've postponed while standing guard over the future. Go cook meals slowly again. Go laugh with people without secretly measuring whether your manifestation is working yet. Go take walks where your mind is allowed to rest. Go build a life that your nervous system actually feels safe inside, instead of treating every day like a waiting room for some future moment of permission to finally exhale. Because here's what most people never realize until much later. The dream itself was never as fragile as your fear convinced you it was. The relationship, the purpose, the success, the healing, the version of life that's genuinely meant for you does not survive because you obsess over it hard enough. You are not holding the universe together with anxiety. The dream has its own momentum, its own intelligence, its own timing. Your job was never to drag it toward you with white-knuckled effort. Your job was to become someone whose inner world could finally receive it without collapsing under the weight of needing it too desperately. And that transformation happens through softness, not force. Through open hands, not clenched fists. Somewhere right now, the version of you who already lives the life you're asking for is moving through an ordinary afternoon. Washing dishes, answering emails, folding laundry, sitting quietly near a window without mentally checking whether the future has arrived yet. Not because they've forgotten the dream mattered, but because the dream has stopped being separate from their identity. They've integrated it. They've stopped being a person desperately waiting for life to begin and become a person already participating in it. That version of you is not as far away as you think. In fact, the distance was never really between you and the thing itself. The distance was between your current nervous system and the capacity required to hold that reality without fear consuming it. And that distance closes slowly, quietly, in inches, not miles. It closes every time you loosen the grip just a little more. Every time you stop rehearsing disaster for one afternoon. Every time you let uncertainty exist without immediately trying to suffocate it with control. Every time you choose openness over surveillance. If this conversation reached somewhere honest inside you, hold on to that feeling gently. Don't turn even this into another performance. Let it settle naturally over the next few days. And tonight, before you sleep, try something very small. Whatever you've been gripping all day long, the unanswered question, the outcome, the waiting, the fear, put it down for a few hours. Not forever, just for tonight. Let your body experience what it feels like to rest without standing guard at the doorway of tomorrow. Tell yourself quietly that the dream will still exist in the morning even if you stop watching it for 8 hours. Because it will. It always did. Sleep tonight with open hands instead of clenched ones. Before you leave, if something in this video reached a part of you that's been exhausted from holding everything too tightly, subscribe and stay close. Because these conversations are not just meant to motivate you for one night, they're meant to slowly retrain the way you move through reality. New videos every week for the people who are tired of forcing, tired of chasing, and ready to understand the deeper mechanics of consciousness, identity, and the hidden patterns shaping their lives. Subscribe, and let's keep walking through this together.